At 0647 on June 6, 1944, Commander Samuel Day stood in the cramped conning tower of the USS Hata, watching 3 Japanese destroyers track his submarine with deadly precision through the moonlit waters off Toi Toi. Age 37, with 5 war patrols and 18 enemy ships destroyed, Day had made a name for himself. The Imperial Japanese Navy had dispatched the destroyers Minazuki, Hayanami, and Tanakaz with orders to eliminate the American submarine that had been disrupting their supply lines for 3 weeks. Before April 1944, American submarines had steered clear of Japanese destroyers. A destroyer could reach 35 knots, while a submerged submarine struggled to hit 9. Between December 1941 and March 1944, Japanese destroyers had sunk 14 American submarines, while no American submarine had ever sunk a Japanese destroyer in direct combat. Commander Day changed that on April 13th. When the destroyer Ikazuchi charged at Hata at full speed, everyone expected Day to retreat. Instead, he ordered full speed ahead, straight at the destroyer. At 900 yards, Hata launched 4 torpedoes in a spread pattern. 2 struck the destroyer midships. It exploded and sank in 5 minutes. Day's radio report became famous. Expended 4 torpedoes, 1 destroyer. Admiral Suimu Toyota, commander of the Japanese Combined Fleet, was not amused. Between January and May 1944, Japan had lost 23 destroyers, and the loss of even more was a major setback to their plan for Operation Ago, a mission to destroy the American invasion fleet at the Philippines. Losing destroyers to submarine attacks disrupted everything. By late May, Toyota had concentrated the mobile fleet at Toi Toi anchorage, which included 4 battleships, including the Yamato, 9 carriers, 15 cruisers, and 28 destroyers. It was the largest concentration of Japanese naval power since Midway. American codebreakers knew they were coming, so Admiral Charles Lockwood sent Hata to patrol the waters around Toi Toi and attack targets of opportunity. For 9 days, Hata operated undetected. But on June 6, at 0300, a Japanese patrol plane spotted the submarine's periscope wake 15 miles north of Toi Toi. 3 destroyers immediately responded. If you're wondering how Day's aggressive tactics turned out when 3 destroyers hunted him, please hit that like button. It helps us share more forgotten stories about the submarines that changed naval warfare. Please subscribe. Now, back to Day. Commander Day watched the lead destroyer, Minazuki, through the periscope. At 1,250 tons and armed with 4 5-inch guns, Minazuki was closing fast, zigzagging to avoid torpedo attacks. Behind her, the other 2 destroyers spread out in a search pattern, boxing Hata into a kill zone. Day swung Hata's bow directly at Minazuki, with a range of 1,100 yards and a timed collision of 96 seconds. Every man in the conning tower knew the risks. A down-the-throat shot involved firing torpedoes straight at a destroyer's bow and diving beneath its keel. If the torpedoes missed, the destroyer would drop depth charges directly on the submarine's position. If they dived too late, the destroyer would ram them. At 750 yards, Day fired 3 torpedoes. "Take her down 300 feet, he ordered. Hata's bow dropped at a 30-degree angle. 40 seconds after firing, 2 explosions shook Hata so violently that light fixtures shattered. A third explosion lifted Hata's stern 6 feet before slamming it back down. Day rose to periscope depth. Where Minazuki had been, there was now debris in an oil slick. The destroyer had broken in half and was sinking. The other 2 destroyers raced away, dropping depth charges at random. At 0900, Admiral Toyota received the news. Furious, he ordered 6 more destroyers to search for the submarine. By noon, Japanese patrol planes were searching every 20 minutes, but Day wasn't done yet. At 0230 on June 7th, Hata surfaced a recharge of batteries. It was pitch black with heavy cloud cover, perfect conditions. At 0312, Day detected a radar contact, a single ship moving at 28 knots, closing fast. At 8,000 yards, Day recognizes another destroyer. The ship was Hayanami, 700 tons, and she had been searching for American submarines since 0100. Her captain, Commander Hideo Kaboki, was exhausted and had orders to return to base at 0300. No one expected an American submarine to attack on the surface at night. Day ordered full speed ahead, pushing Hata to 21 knots. He closed the distance deliberately, planning to get inside the destroyer's radar range before being spotted. At 4,000 yards, Hayanomi's radar operator picked up a fast-moving surface contact, assuming it was another destroyer. At 3,000 yards, Kuboki realized his mistake. It was an American submarine. He ordered full speed and turned to ram, but it was too late. At 2,300 yards, Dei fired 4 torpedoes. 2 struck Hayanomi's starboard side, near the aft magazine. The explosion tore off the destroyer's stern, and she rolled 90 degrees as she sank stern first. Kuboki and 147 of his crew went down with the ship. Japanese patrol planes would arrive soon, but by then, Dei had already struck twice. 2 destroyers in 24 hours. The Japanese Navy was hunting Hata with everything they had. Toyota was furious. 2 destroyers lost in 2 days to the same submarine. He pulled 8 destroyers from convoy escort duty and formed them into hunter-killer groups, tasked with finding and destroying Hata. Every destroyer captain received the same orders: maximum aggression, no retreat. Kill that submarine. On June 8th, Dei took Hata south, towards Sabutu Passage, the narrow strait between Toi Toi and Borneo. Japanese destroyers constantly patrolled the narrow Sabutu Passage. Commander Dei was determined to see how many he could sink before the Japanese caught on to his tactics. At 1,400 hours, the lookout spotted 2 destroyers steaming in formation, Tanakaz and an unidentified escort. Both were moving at 25 knots, following a standard search pattern. Dei studied their movements for 90 minutes, observing that they followed a predictable zigzag pattern, changing course every 8 minutes. This gave him about 30 seconds after each turn to set up a shot. He positioned Hata directly in their path and waited. At 16:30, Tanakaz turned toward Hata's position. The range was 3,000 yards. Dei let her close. 2,500 yards, 2,000 yards, 1,500 yards. At 1,200 yards, he fired 4 torpedoes at 17-second intervals. The first torpedo missed, but the second struck Tanakaz near the bridge. The third hit the forward magazine, and the explosion was so massive that even through sealed hatches, the crew of Hata heard it clearly underwater. Tanakaz's bow section detached from the hull, and both parts sank within 3 minutes. The escort destroyer immediately turned and charged Hata's position, dropping depth charges as she came. Dei ordered Hata deep to 400 feet. The depth charges exploded overhead, violently shaking the submarine, but causing no serious damage. After 40 minutes, the destroyer gave up and withdrew. 3 destroyers sunk in 3 days. Admiral Toyota was preparing to make a decision that would change the course of the Battle of the Philippine Sea. But before that, Dei had 1 more destroyer to sink. And this time, he would do it in broad daylight with 2 Japanese destroyers watching. On June 9th, at 0500, Dei brought Hata to periscope depth 12 miles southwest of Toi Toi. What he saw made every man in the conning tower hold their breath. Dead ahead, 4 Japanese destroyers were steaming in line-astern formation, actively searching for submarines. Their sonar was pinging so loudly that the sound operator could hear it without headphones. Dei had 8 torpedoes left. 4 destroyers meant he would likely get only 2 shots before they overwhelmed him. He studied their formation through the periscope. The lead destroyer was zigzagging aggressively. The second destroyer was maintaining a steady course. That was his target. At 0612, the second destroyer turned directly toward Hata's position. The range was 4,000 yards. Dei waited. 3,000 yards, 2,500 yards. At 1,800 yards, he fired 3 torpedoes. All 3 struck the destroyer's port side within 5 seconds of each other. The explosion was so violent that debris flew 300 feet into the air. The destroyer rolled over and sank in 90 seconds. The remaining 3 destroyers immediately converged on Hata's position. Dei ordered the submarine deep, 500 feet. Depth charges exploded overhead, 23 in the first 10 minutes. The lights went out, and emergency lighting kicked in. The hull groaned under pressure. A pipe burst in the forward torpedo room, spraying seawater across the deck. The crew of Hata worked in silence, making repairs while the depth charges continued to detonate around them. After 2 hours, the destroyers withdrew. Dei climbed to periscope depth. The destroyers were gone. 4 enemy warships sunk in 4 days. But Day wasn't thinking about his success. He was thinking about fuel. Hata had burned through 60% of her diesel reserves. With only about 3 days' worth of fuel left, she would soon have to withdraw to Fremantle. Admiral Jizaburo Ozawa, commander of the Japanese mobile fleet at Toi Toi, received reports of the attacks at 1,400 hours on June 9th. 4 destroyers lost, and 1 submarine. Ozawa quickly did the math. If an American submarine could penetrate his defensive screen this easily, the entire anchorage was vulnerable. He sent an urgent message to Admiral Toyota, stating that the mobile fleet needed to depart Toi Toi immediately. Toyota agreed. Operation Ago, which was supposed to intercept the American invasion force near the Marianas, wasn't scheduled to begin until June 15th. Moving 6 days early would leave his carriers without proper reconnaissance, scatter his destroyers across multiple patrol zones, and leave his supply lines unestablished. But staying at Toi Toi with an American submarine hunting his destroyers was suicide. On June 10th, at 0800, the Japanese mobile fleet departed Toi Toi, 4 battleships, 9 carriers, 15 cruisers, and 24 destroyers, heading northeast toward the Philippine Sea. American codebreakers intercepted the movement orders within hours. Admiral Raymond Spruance, commander of the Fifth Fleet, adjusted his battle plans accordingly. The early departure gave American carriers an extra day to position themselves for what would become the Battle of the Philippine Sea. Day knew none of this. On June 10th, at 16:30, he spotted 2 more destroyers patrolling north of Cebutu Passage. Both were moving at high speed and conducting an aggressive search pattern. Day had 5 torpedoes left, enough for 1 more attack. At 17:15, he fired 3 torpedoes at the lead destroyer. 1 struck near the bow. The destroyer slowed but didn't sink. The second destroyer immediately charged Hata's position. Day fired his last 2 torpedoes, but both missed. With no torpedoes left and the Japanese destroyer bearing down on him at 32 knots, Day ordered an emergency dive. Hata's diving planes bit hard, pushing the submarine down at maximum angle. At 400 to 500 feet, the destroyer passed directly overhead. Its propellers churned the water so loudly that Hata's crew could hear the blades through the hull. Then, silence! The destroyer was circling back. Day knew the pattern. The destroyer would make multiple passes, dropping depth charges each time until either the submarine surfaced or imploded. With no torpedoes left to fight back and no way to damage the destroyer, Day's only option was to outlast the attack and hope the destroyer exhausted its depth charges first. The first pattern dropped at 17:23, with 6 depth charges exploding in a tight formation around Hata. The submarine rolled 15 degrees to starboard, and light bulbs shattered. Men grabbed handholds as the blast rocked the vessel. A second pattern came just 2 minutes later, much closer this time. The explosions lifted Hata's stone, slamming it back down. Cork insulation rained from the overhead, and a hydraulic line burst in the control room. For 90 minutes, the destroyer hunted Hata, dropping a total of 42 depth charges. Most exploded too shallow or too far away, but 3 detonated close enough to crack gauge glass and spring minor leaks. Day kept Hata at 500 feet, moving at 2 knots, making as little noise as possible. Finally, at 1900 hours, the destroyer withdrew, having exhausted its depth charge supply. Day waited for another hour before surfacing. The ocean was empty. No destroyers, no patrol planes, just darkness and the sound of the diesel engines recharging the batteries. Hata limped south toward Fremantle at 8 knots, preserving fuel. She arrived on June 26 after a 17-day patrol. The moment Hata tied up at the pier, Admiral Charles Lockwood was waiting. He had been tracking Day's patrol reports via radio intercepts. 5 destroyers had attacked, 4 confirmed sunk, and 1 damaged. In just 12 days, it was the most successful anti-destroyer patrol in submarine warfare history. Lockwood awarded Day the Navy Cross on the spot. Then he asked the question every submarine commander dreaded. "Can you do it again?" Day's response was immediate. "Give me torpedoes, and I'll sink 10. Hata's crew spent July in Fremantle undergoing repairs and resupply. Day trained new crew members on the down-the-throat attack tactics. By late July, every submarine commander in the Pacific had studied Hata patrol reports. The tactic worked. Between June and August 1944, American submarines sank 14 Japanese destroyers using variations of Day's aggressive approach. On August 5th, Hata departed Fremantle for her 6th war patrol. She had been assigned to operate as part of a 3-submarine wolf pack with USS Hado and USS Hake. Commander Day was in charge. Their mission was to patrol the waters west of Luzon and attack Japanese shipping heading to the Philippines. The patrol started well. On August 21st, the wolf pack intercepted a 16-ship convoy off Palawan Bay. In a coordinated attack, they sank 4 cargo ships, totaling 22,000 tons. On August 22nd, Hata and Hado attacked 3 coastal defense vessels off Banten. All 3 sank. Hata were credited with destroying 2 frigates, Matsuo and Hibui. By August 23rd, Hado had expended all her torpedoes and withdrew from the patrol, leaving Hata and Hake to operate together off Daisao Bay on the western coast of Luzon. Japanese intelligence had tracked the Wolfpack's movements. They knew the general location of the American submarines and had sent something special to deal with them. At 0453 on August 24th, USS Hake submerged 4 miles off Hermaname Island. Through her periscope, the crew could see Hata on the surface, 4,500 yards to the south. Both submarines were preparing to attack a damaged Japanese destroyer that Hado had torpedoed the previous day. Then, the sonar operator aboard Hake heard something that made his blood run cold. Echo ranging. The sound was close and getting closer. 2 Japanese escort ships were closing in on Hata's position. CD-22 and minesweeper PB-102 were moving at 18 knots, conducting an active sonar search. They had been hunting American submarines for 3 days. Japanese intelligence had intercepted radio transmissions between Hata, Hake, and Hado during the Palawan Bay attack. They knew the Wolfpack was operating somewhere off Daisao Bay. The captain of Hake immediately ordered the submarine deep and silent. He watched through his periscope as the 2 Japanese ships closed in on Hata. At 0520, Hake's radio operator tried to warn Hata, but there was no response. Either Hata's radio was off, or she was already preparing to dive. At 0530, Hata crash-dived. The Japanese ships were now less than 2,000 yards away. Day saw them at the last possible moment and took Hata down fast, ordering flank speed and maximum dive angle. The submarine descended at a 35 degrees angle, with a diesel engine still running, leaving a massive bubble trail on the surface that pinpointed her exact location. CD-22 sonar operator had a perfect contact, range 1,200 yards, depth approximately 200 feet. Still diving, the escort ship's captain ordered an immediate depth charge attack. At 0547, CD-22 made her first pass over Hata and dropped a full pattern of depth charges set to detonate at 250 feet. The explosions bracketed Hata perfectly, with at least 3 detonating within 50 feet of her hull. The submarine's pressure hull cracked near the after torpedo room, and seawater flooded in at tremendous pressure. Hata's stern flooded completely within 90 seconds. The submarine's bow rose sharply as the stern dragged her down. Day ordered all ballast blown in an emergency surface attempt. The compressed air system fought against the flooding, but there was too much water in the stern compartments. Hata couldn't reach the surface. At 0552, CD-22 made a second depth charge run. This time, the explosions were even closer. The blast ruptured Hata's main pressure hull in multiple locations, and control room flooded. Electrical power failed. The emergency lighting went dark. At 600 feet, well below her maximum operating depth, Hata's hull began to implode. Bulkheads collapsed under pressure, and compartments were crushed like tin cans. The submarine was gone in less than 3 minutes from the first depth charge impact. At 0600, CD-22 and PB-102 reported a successful kill. Large quantities of oil, wood debris, and cork floated to the surface. The Japanese ship circled the area for 2 hours, dropping additional depth charges to ensure the submarine was destroyed. They recovered no survivors. All 79 men aboard Hata perished. Commander Samuel Day, radio man Calvin Bull, who had earned a Bronze Star for his destroyer kills in June, and every officer and sailor who had helped make Hata the most feared submarine in the Pacific. USS Hake remained submerged until nightfall. Her captain filed a contact report describing Hata's loss, and the message reached Admiral Lockwood at 0800 on August 25th. Lockwood immediately suspended all submarine operations in the Daisao Bay area and ordered every boat to withdraw to safer waters. The news reached the United States in early September, with the Navy Department announcing that USS Harter was presumed lost with all hands. No additional details were provided due to the classified nature of submarine operations. The American public wouldn't learn the full story of Harter's Fifth Patrol until after the war ended, but the Japanese knew. Admiral Toyota received the report on August 26. The submarine that had terrorized his destroyer fleet for 3 months was finally gone. He ordered a commendation for CD-22's crew. What Toyota didn't know was how much damage Day had already inflicted, and how his 4 days in June had changed everything. The Battle of the Philippine Sea began on June 19, 1944, 9 days after Harter sank a fourth destroyer off Toi Toi. Admiral Ozawa's mobile fleet engaged Admiral Spruan's Fifth Fleet in what would become the largest carrier battle in history. 15 American carriers faced 9 Japanese carriers, with 900 American aircraft against 430 Japanese aircraft. The battle lasted 2 days, during which American pilots shot down 376 Japanese aircraft while losing only 30 of their own. American pilots called it the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. 3 Japanese carriers, Taihaho, Shokaku, and Hayo, were sunk, and 2 battleships were damaged. 1 cruiser was sunk. The Imperial Japanese Navy lost 75% of its carrier air groups and would never recover. But the battle might have gone differently if Admiral Ozawa had arrived on schedule. His original plan called for the mobile fleet to depart Toi Toi on June 15th, which would have given his reconnaissance planes 4 days to locate the American fleet before the battle began. His carriers would have been fully supplied, his destroyer screens properly organized, and his battle plan coordinated with land-based aircraft from the Philippines. Instead, Harter forced him to leave 6 days early. Ozawa arrived in the Philippine Sea on June 14th with his fleet scattered across 200 miles of ocean. His reconnaissance aircraft had burned through their fuel reserves during the early departure and couldn't conduct proper searches. His destroyers were still regrouping from anti-submarine patrols around Toi Toi, and his supply ships were 3 days behind schedule. When American carrier aircraft found Ozawa's fleet on June 19th, his carriers were still launching aircraft. His combat air patrol was undermanned, and his fleet formation was disorganized. The Great Marianas Turkey Shoot happened because Ozawa wasn't ready. And Ozawa wasn't ready because Day had sunk 4 destroyers in 4 days and convinced the Japanese that Toi Toi was too dangerous. Admiral Lockwood understood this immediately. In his post-war memoir, he wrote that Harter's Fifth Patrol was the most strategically important submarine operation of the Pacific War. Sinking 4 destroyers meant 4 fewer escorts for Japanese carriers. But forcing the mobile fleet to depart early meant the entire Japanese battle plan collapsed before the first shot was fired. Between December 1941 and August 1944, American submarines sank 1,314 enemy ships totaling 5.3 million tons, Japanese merchant vessels, cargo ships, tankers, and troop transports, but only 29 warships. Most submarine captains avoided warships. They were too dangerous, too well-armed, and too fast. Day proved that submarines could hunt warships successfully. His down-the-throat tactic worked because it violated every assumption Japanese destroyer captains made about submarine behavior. Submarines weren't supposed to charge destroyers. They were supposed to run. When Harter charged, Japanese captains hesitated. That hesitation cost them 12 seconds, and 12 seconds was enough time for torpedoes to close the range and strike. By war's end, American submarines using Day's tactics had sunk 214 Japanese warships, including 4 aircraft carriers, 1 battleship, 9 cruisers, and 38 destroyers. The rest were submarines, escorts, and patrol craft. Japan started the war with 63 destroyers, building 49 more during the war. American submarines sank 38. Harter accounted for 4 of them in just 4 days. On March 27, 1946, President Harry Truman presented Commander Samuel Day's Medal of Honor to his widow, Edwina Day, in a ceremony on the White House lawn. The citation read in part, "This remarkable record of 5 vital Japanese destroyers sunk in 5 short-range torpedo attacks attests to the valiant fighting spirit of Commander Day and his indomitable command." The Navy named a destroyer escort after him, USS Day commissioned in 1954. She sailed until 1972. Harter received numerous accolades posthumously, remembered as one of the most successful submarines of World War II. The USS Harter was awarded the Presidential Unit Citation for her first 5 war patrols, along with 6 battle stars for her service during World War II. Her motto, "Hit him harder," became legendary throughout the submarine force. However, her true legacy lies in the tactical revolution she sparked. Before Harter's 5th Patrol, submarine doctrine emphasized stealth and evasion. If a destroyer detected a submarine, the typical response was to flee. The submarine would dive deep, rig for silent running, and hope the depth charges missed. Directly engaging destroyers in combat was considered suicidal because the math didn't work out. Destroyers were faster, better armed, and specifically designed to kill submarines. Commander Day changed that equation by recognizing a critical fact about destroyer captains. They expected submarines to run. When a submarine instead charged, the destroyer captain had to make an instant decision with incomplete information. Should they turn left or right? Maintain course? Fire their guns? Meanwhile, torpedoes closed in at 46 knots. Most captains made the wrong choice. By the time they realized a mistake, the torpedoes were already hitting. Between June and December 1944, 12 American submarines adopted Day's aggressive tactics. The USS Tang sank 2 destroyers, USS Trigger sank 1, USS Bob sank 1 destroyer and damaged another, and USS Flasher sank 3 escort vessels using down-the-throat attacks. The tactic had a success rate of 63%. For every 5 attacks, submarines sank 3 destroyers and damaged 1 more, with only 1 in 5 attacks failing entirely. Japanese destroyer captains quickly adapted. By late 1944, they developed counter-tactics. When a submarine charged, destroyers would turn away and circle back, forcing the submarine to expose a broadside to torpedo attacks from other destroyers in the formation. Alternatively, they would slow down deliberately, letting the torpedoes pass ahead while closing in for a ram. Despite these countermeasures, the tactic still worked, though the success rate dropped to 40%. American submarine losses increased. Between August and December 1944, 9 submarines were lost to destroyer attacks. The Tang sank on October 24th when her own torpedo circled back and hit her. Harter went down on August 24th. Data ran aground on October 23rd while pursuing a destroyer. Yet, even with higher losses, submarines were sinking more enemy ships than ever before. The aggressive tactics proved effective. Admiral Lockwood faced a difficult decision: recall all submarines and return to defensive tactics or accept higher losses in exchange for completely destroying Japan's convoy system. He chose aggression. Between January and August 1945, American submarines operating under these aggressive doctrines sank 437 Japanese merchant ships and 53 warships. By August 1945, Japan had less than 25% of the merchant tonnage it started the war with. The home islands were starving, factories shut down for lack of raw materials, and the Imperial Japanese Navy couldn't fuel its remaining ships. Day, however, never saw the impact of his tactics. He was killed 3 months after his greatest victory, taken down by the same type of escort ship he had spent a year learning to destroy. But his tactics lived on. Every submarine commander in the Pacific studied Harter's patrol reports. Every attack plan incorporated the down-the-throat doctrine. Every torpedo solution included calculations for charging destroyers. On May 22, 2024, 80 years after Harter sank, an underwater exploration team led by Tim Taylor and the Lost 52 Project discovered the wreck of Harter in the South China Sea. The submarine sits upright on the sea floor at a depth of 3,750 feet, 12 miles west of Daisao Bay, where she made her last dive. Her pressure hull remains mostly intact, except for damage near the conning tower caused by depth charges. The wreck is a protected war grave, and no salvage operations are allowed. But finding Harter meant more than locating a shipwreck. It meant bringing closure to families who had waited 80 years for answers and honoring the 79 men who changed naval warfare forever. Today, Harter's story continues in unexpected ways. At the United States Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland, submarine tactics instructors still teach the down-the-throat attack as a case study in aggressive warfare. Modern submarines no longer use the same tactic. Modern torpedoes are wire-guided and don't require close-range attacks. But Day's approach demonstrates a fundamental principle. When your enemy expects you to run, charging often works better than hiding. The Naval History and Heritage Command maintains HARTA's complete patrol reports in their archives, documenting every radio message, every torpedo firing solution, and every depth charge attack. Researchers studying submarine warfare in the Pacific can trace how Day developed his tactic across 6 war patrols. His reports show a commander who learned from every encounter, constantly refined his approach, and never stopped looking for ways to sink more enemy ships. Commander Day is buried at Arlington National Cemetery in Section 59, grave 874. His headstone lists his rank, his dates of service, and one line, Medal of Honor, Destroyer Killer. Families of HARTA's crew visit every year on August 24th, the anniversary of her sinking. They place flowers and share stories about grandfathers and great-uncles who died at 22, 25, or 37, fighting a war most of them never expected to survive. The 79 men aboard HARTA came from 38 states, farm boys from Iowa, factory workers from Michigan, college graduates from California. They volunteered for submarine duty, fully aware of the casualty rates. 22% of submariners who served in World War II died, the highest percentage of any branch of the military. They knew the odds. They served anyway. Calvin Bull, the radio man who earned a Bronze Star for his role in sinking 5 destroyers, was 24 when he died. John Mao, who survived HARTA's sinking and later became an admiral, spent 50 years telling their story before passing away in 2010 at age 90. The last survivor of HARTA's crew, Paul Bryce, died in 2022 at age 98. With his death, no one remains alive to share their story firsthand. That's why stories like this matter. These men left behind patrol reports, radio messages, and Medal of Honor citations, but those documents can't convey what it felt like to charge a destroyer at flank speed, hear depth charges exploding overhead, or watch a captain make decisions that meant life or death for everyone aboard. The official history tells us that HARTA sank 4 destroyers in 4 days, but it doesn't capture the fear, the exhaustion, or the certainty that this patrol might be their last. If this story moved you as much as it moved us, please hit that like button. Every like tells YouTube to share this story with more people. Subscribe and turn on notifications. We're rescuing forgotten stories from dusty archives every day. Stories of submarine commanders who changed naval warfare with aggressive tactics. Real people, real heroism. Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Whether you're from the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, or Australia, our community spans a globe. You're not just a viewer. You're part of keeping these memories alive. Thank you for watching and for making sure that Commander Samuel Day and the 79 men of USS HARTA don't fade into silence. These men deserve to be remembered, and you're helping make that happen.